It's the late 90s. You throw yourself out of bed, run to the kitchen, pour yourself a bowl of cereal, and head to the couch. Because what day is it? Saturday. Saturday morning cartoons were at an all-time high in the late 90s. We got Batman the Animated Series, X-Men, Street Sharks, Recess, but only one cartoon stood above the rest, and that cartoon was Spider-Man the Animated Series.
Hey everyone, welcome back to 2 Hours on a Sunday. I'm Nick.
And I'm Brian, and as you guessed it, we're talking about Spider-Man the Animated Series today, and it's an interesting topic because coming from someone like myself, who grew up on this show and has watched it religiously, to someone like Nick, who has only recently, in the last 2 months, binged this show so we can talk about it.
Yep.
There's going to be very different perspectives.
I will say, there are some great, fun episodes, and I totally understand the appeal, and I could see myself in the 90s watching this for sure. Binging it over the last 2 months, it's not bad. It's not a bad show by any means.
It's definitely a show, a product of its time, right?
Absolutely. There's a lot of campy cartoons from the 90s feel. It still has, what I found most interesting, I think, was the camp of the really early Silver and Bronze Age comics. It wasn't like the grittier stuff that we see with like Batman, or even like the more subdued stuff that we see in the 90s with Spawn. It was very much that early Spider-Man comic feel.
Do you know why?
I don't know why. Why?
Would you like me to get into that?
I would love for you to get into that.
So in the early 90s, Avi Arad, everyone knows who he is. He's been the tyrant of Sony for the last 23 years and has been the reason for some of the poor decisions that have been made. But in the early 90s, for everyone who doesn't know comics, the late 80s, early 90s, Marvel Comics was at an all-time low. Stories were egregious. They were really long. There was no end in sight. They didn't really have what's today, where there's 5-6 issue series where everyone can pick it up in like a matter of months and read it. It was like years and years of
like drawn out storylines.
90s. That's when the Clone Saga happened. Everybody hated it. The writing was terrible. So at this point, Avi Arad was the owner of Toy Biz. So what he did, he bought Marvel Comics, and his whole goal was to sell merchandise and sell toys. And so the X-Men show had just come out, right? And that was doing really well because they needed some way to make people get interested in superheroes again because comics were doing so bad. But this show, John Semper Jr. was the showrunner. He was brought on to do the show, but Avi Arad wanted to just sell toys. All he wanted to do was sell toys, and he wanted to make it bright and vibrant, which is probably why all the designs of every character in the show, that's the only design people know, right?
Exactly.
It's so ingrained in our minds. Even for someone like you who hasn't seen the show, you can understand why those were the designs people knew.
Absolutely.
Because they were made for toys. And that, going into some of the later arcs, that'll explain why some of the designs and some of the laser guns, and like you have Blade using a laser sword. It's like everything was designed to sell toys and bring toys to the market. He wanted basically every episode a one-off, but John Semper Jr. didn't want to do that. Season 1 was very, let's introduce all the villains, but he didn't want any season-long arcs. He wanted one episode to just play so audiences wouldn't get confused. But then obviously we get into season 2, 3, 4, and 5,
right,
where there's, you have full Neogenic Nightmare storylines. You have, Sins of the Father. You have the full arc of the Secret Wars and Spider Wars. And then you have the 6 Forgotten Warriors. So he totally kind of ignored Avi Arad's wishes.
Yeah.
But his whole thing was just to make toys. That's what he wanted to do before, as we know today, because you have Spider-Man at Sony, you have Hulk at Universal, you have all these other Marvel characters. He started selling off the characters to make movies to make more money because Marvel wasn't profitable. And obviously the product of his time with the censorship, I think there's certain things in the show we'll get to about the crazy censorship that they had to go through, unlike Batman the Animated Series.
Right. That explains so much to me, because at first when I saw like the laser guns, I was like, oh, it's a kid's show. They don't want to just depict guns.
That too as well. But it also looks cooler on screen than, bullets. Like
exactly.
You're going to have lasers.
Wow.
But also, if you notice, he never throws a punch.
Right.
If he does throw a punch, he usually misses.
Yes.
So he only ever webs and kicks people because for some reason they didn't want, Spider-Man, the kid's hero, to be violent.
Right.
So that was another thing. And also with Morbius, we'll get into Morbius in season 2, but there was some mad censorship with him and changing his whole kind of origin.
Yeah, that we'll definitely get into Morbius and Neogenic Nightmare, because that was an interesting arc, because that was all of season 2, right?
Yep.
The whole thing.
And then a little bit of season 4.
That's right. I feel like for me, the smaller story arcs were my favorites. And we'll definitely talk about our like top threes and maybe a couple honorable mentions as we go along. But those longer story arcs to me felt kind of dragged out at some points.
John Semper Jr., he was the first black showrunner in like cartoon history.
No kidding.
But it's also, you don't find too often that the showrunner writes all the episodes, and he has writing credits on 60 of the 65 episodes.
I was going to say, I saw his name in every intro almost. You literally created a massive resurgence for Spider-Man.
This show is the reason people know Spider-Man, right?
Exactly.
Besides the early comics, like this was the show. And it sprinkled. This show had so much of an impact that the Raimi trilogy had a lot of stuff influenced by it. The later comics had a lot of stuff influenced by it. Like this show was massive.
Right.
And like this show was the first show to introduce Venom on the screen.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that later.
That's huge. Like to me, it's like, okay, job well done. Overall, I think the show has a lot of like really good points. There's a lot to be said about the impact that it had for sure on Spider-Man moving forward.
And as someone who's watched it when they were 5 years old and who has a lot of nostalgia behind it, I can come at it like there's a lot of episodes I just skip because I don't like them. I'm not one to say this show is absolutely perfect. Every episode hits.
You told me to skip episodes. You're just like, I just don't worry about it.
I'm like, you don't need to watch it. It's not necessary. But the episodes that I loved as a kid, I have all the VHSs.
Yeah.
Right. Those ones that I watched over and over again, those ones still hit even if I watch today. It's not just because, the music brings you back or the characters. They're actually good stories, right? It's bare bones. You have hero versus villain. You have consequence in Peter's life. They still hit today. So I'm not coming at this. There's going to be nitpicks. There's going to be, stuff we want to correct. It's not a perfect show, and I'm not coming at it like it's the greatest thing of all time.
Right.
Even though this is the reason why I love Spider-Man.
Right. And that I think that's a great way to put it. You can see it objectively for its faults and its wins. So how do you want to get this going? What do you want to talk about first about this? Because there is definitely a lot to talk about.
I want to talk about let's dive into the seasons.
Okay.
Because we can go into kind of our favorite arcs. And I want to bring up, if you look at the cast in the 90s when cartoons were at a high, they really utilized voice actors.
Yes.
And as a kid, you don't really notice that. But now I'm looking at them like they had all voice actors in this cast. And they actually had Jim Cummings play Shocker. And I was watching one of the Symbiote episodes and he was in it. And I was like, why does that sound so familiar? And I look at the cast and Jim Cummings was Shocker. They had it lined with
very
voice
cool
actors. The way this show starts, I feel it's such a strong episode. With introducing, so season 1, for everyone who hasn't watched it, it's basically one-off episodes with a couple 2-3-parters here and there to introduce all the villains to get you ready for the following seasons.
Yep.
So episode 1 starts you off with the Lizard and Dr. Kirk Connors. And I don't know if it's episode 1 they had the budget, but this episode looks so good.
It does. It competes with the Goblin episodes, the Venom episodes, and like the final season.
This is also a first time where Dr. Kirk Connors is a teacher to Peter.
Yes.
And this also introduces the idea of neogenics.
Yes.
Neogenics, for everyone who doesn't know, is the science term they use for what they do to transform other heroes and villains into, like Spider-Man, the neogenics that shock the spider that bit him. And he uses neogenics on lizard DNA to help regrow his arm.
Right.
Kind of like in the Amazing Spider-Man movie with Andrew Garfield.
Right.
But throughout the show, they use neogenics a lot. And even season 2, the whole theme is neogenic nightmare. So neogenics is just a scientific term for what they use throughout the whole show to describe powers.
Yeah, I think that first episode was a really good way to get the ball rolling. It had so much. I like where they started. Peter's already Spider-Man.
He's veteran.
Yeah, exactly. It's a comfortable spot to be in. We get to know him. He seems to be in college doing some research with Dr. Connors, and he's a smart kid, right? He's
very smart.
Yeah. This is like the most adult Spider-Man we've seen, I think. Also, the characters don't look like they're young
because he's
kids.
in college, right?
Exactly.
He's in college.
Who else do we meet in that first episode? We meet
Eddie Brock.
He is okay.
We introduce Eddie Brock.
Eddie Brock is super hostile.
Yeah.
At the very beginning to Peter.
Well, they have to do that because later in the show, and
Yep.
like 8 episodes down the road, they have to have him built up, right?
Yeah, it was like right off the bat because I'm coming from Spectacular Spider-Man where they're like friends and colleagues in school,
Right.
and then now they're like Eddie
They're
Brock,
colleagues, right? He works for the Bugle.
right? He's like he hates him straight up right away.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think this design of the lizard is my favorite of all time.
Oh, okay.
The way he has the green in the snout and the eyes, but the way his trench coat is all ripped
Yes.
and like it's the purple pants, right? It's a very, and just the way they animate him, it looks incredible, but the whole design is very striking, but it's not terrifying, but it plays well into, toys, right?
Exactly.
It's a very nostalgic, vibrant look to the lizard.
Yes.
And no matter how many figures they come out with, that is, I just want that head sculpt. The head of the lizard is my favorite.
And because it has those it has the snout, but it has those little like bumps on it. And as soon as I think of the lizard, that's what I go to. Well, yeah, I'm going to say that for pretty much every design.
Yeah.
And that's the funny thing. It's like like what we said, I never grew up with this show, but these are the designs that I associate with the characters.
Probably because of me.
Probably.
I had all the toys. Even the trading cards, though, right? Some of the trading cards that I had that we drew constantly, as we grew older, those designs were depicted.
Yeah.
I
still have those
from the 90s show. Yeah.
I'm going to pull those out. I forgot.
Yeah, I have them all framed on my wall.
That's
'Cause
right.
I have the whole set.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that design of the lizard, I think, is the one you should think of when you go to him as a character.
He's also scary too, right? The way they started this first episode off for kids, like it's very dark and ominous, and like there's lightning and there's a lot of rain and there's a lot of over the shoulder shots, right? So and like under his snout shots to show how big and menacing he is.
Exactly. Why do you think they made that episode that dark? Why not make it like bright and more triumphant?
I think you have to start off with a bang, but you have to show that the show is not the 60s. Right, you have to show that they want to take the show seriously, and the writing is going to be good, right? And their storylines, and they also have to start with Doc Connors because Doc Connors is a huge role in Peter's life throughout the rest of the show.
Yes,
and the way to do that, to really set it apart from everything else, is to really give the audience something striking.
Exactly. I guess when the Amazing Spider-Man movies came out, I was like, why is the lizard the first?
I was so excited.
Yeah, because I didn't get it. It didn't click until just now. I was like, oh yeah, they did that in the 90s. It's great. And you're right. Like Doc Connors was a pivotal role, or played a pivotal role in like the whole show. He was in there at the last season.
He was.
Yeah.
And it's also, beginning and end, right?
Yeah.
You started off with somebody who's a mentor in Peter's life because he doesn't have Uncle Ben, but it's also to start the show off with someone he can't defeat because he wants to save him.
Exactly.
Right? That's what the whole thing of the lizard is.
Yeah.
He's a monster, but he also trying to save his, mentor. So he has to try to find a way to balance defeating the villain. And also, we also get into him trying to be a photographer at the same time, balancing his superhero life with his personal life to make money.
Yes.
Right? He's having a hard time. How do you go about taking photos of the lizard without damaging Curt Connors, right? That's what happened in the Spectacular and all the other, iterations of the lizard. But they did it in a way where, he saves him, but then says, oh, here's a battle with Spidey and the lizard. And he gets in good graces with Jonah Jameson,
right?
That kind of thing. But it builds their whole relationship and him wanting to save someone that's important to him.
Exactly. I liked how they didn't include too much in terms of Peter's life right away. They didn't include like the love interest right away.
But that comes in a great way later.
So as we move through that season, what else do we see?
So we have Doc Ock in coming episodes, but the next 2 episodes I want to bring up because it's another thing about wanting to sell toys, and it's the Spider Slayer episodes. Smythe's Spider Slayers.
Oh, yes.
Kingpin. They introduce Kingpin.
Yeah.
Who is really a great, I see him more as a Spider-Man villain than Daredevil.
Right.
Because of this show.
Yep.
Right? He's a great way to be the face of the city, like always, and everyone thinks he's just Wilson Fisk.
He's like a philanthropist,
company, but he's the money and the backing to all these villains in this show, and he's the brains behind all the villainy, which is so cool.
Yes.
And this design as well for Wilson Fisk.
I do like it.
I can't see it. I mean, Into the Spider-Verse did a great Wilson Fisk.
He's just massive, yes.
Yeah, he's massive. But this white suit, the cane, everything.
Yep.
This is what I see Wilson Fisk as. And introducing the Spider Slayers. It's very toy-esque because watching it as a kid, I don't watch the episodes now because I'm like, they got some good moments in them, but I'm like, as a kid, I was like, I want those toys.
Yes.
Right? Because you can combine them. They had the Ultimate Spider Slayer and they had 3 of them stacked on top of each other.
That's awesome.
But it was just, those episodes were made just to make toys. Basically.
Exactly.
But then you get into Doc Ock. And I think it was a great introduction to Doc Ock because it showed Peter's love for science. They opened it up with him learning from Dr. Octavius before he becomes a villain at science camp, right?
Yep.
He was also another one of Peter's mentors. So then they show him working in a lab and stuff goes wrong. And of course, from that, he has the Doc Ock tentacles. And then he becomes Dr. Octavius and wanting to get money and things to build his, reactor, as you would say.
Right.
And so that's the following episodes. Then you break into the Sting of the Scorpion, right? Scorpion was scary too. He was huge in that first season.
Yes. I always thought Scorpion was kind of like a goofy character until I watched this show because he's more of like a neogenic kind of experiment, right?
Yes.
But it kind of backfired. It went a little he went a little off the rails, very hostile because all like the suit fused to his body.
And he was permanently Scorpion.
Exactly. Definitely thought he was a really good villain, and I like how he comes back every once in a while in the show.
From Scorpion, you get there's the Mysterio episode, which is really cool.
Yes.
And then you dive into what I think is easily the best arc of season 1, and I think of the whole show, which is the symbiote saga.
Absolutely.
And I think it's such a good idea to bring in the symbiote because this is the first time they've done it on TV because Venom was only introduced in the 80s. Right, as a comic book character. And they introduced the Rhino in this episode, the first episode when he goes to save Colonel Jameson from crash landing on the Brooklyn Bridge.
That's right.
And I've watched this VHS so much that if you were sitting next to me, I would be reciting every single line, even to this day. And when Spider-Man shows up, because this whole thing is Eddie Brock wanting to get back in good graces with Jameson. So if he can get pictures of the crash, and then he notices Rhino, but Rhino gets in there and Spider-Man showed up. Peter shows up, which is convenient because he works for the Bugle. So he knows all the stories that are happening so he can get there faster. And he shows up and he's like, oh, the door's ripped off, and he goes inside. He sees Rhino. He's like, who are you? And he's like, where are you from? He's like, Jersey. And he's like, you got a claim check for that bag? He's like, check this. Yeah. And it's very like the quips are actually really good in this show, and it's like 90s cheese.
Yes.
But it's so good. This is the first introduction of Rhino, and then he tags him with the Spider Tracer.
Yep.
Right, which is also another cool thing because it's a thing for toys. The Spider Tracer.
Exactly.
That was the first time we see
the little
Spider
handheld receiver
the device, and he's like, oh, the Jolly Grey Giant. He calls him that, that kind of thing. And so he leaves. Rhino escapes with the Prometheum X, is what they introduced, which is the stone they find in space that's covered in the ooze.
Right.
And so Rhino escapes, but Eddie Brock gets all the photos of the Rhino, but he uses it as a way to frame Spider-Man that he stole something from the shuttle, which gets into, the shuttle falling into the river. Spider-Man's on board, and then he comes up, he's coated in this black sludge, right? He thinks it's just,
it might be like oil or something from the crash. Yeah.
Rich, thick, and creamy is what he says, right? And then so Jameson pulls out, he says he wants $1 million because he thinks Spider-Man is the one who
sabotaged everything.
Sabotaged the shuttles for his son because the son was the one flying it.
Right.
And so now at this point, what I think is so cool is how the show adapted so many comic books and the visuals of the comics. And is when we get the nightmare Peter has. And then the symbiote crawls from his hamper and latches on, just like the Spider-Man Raimi's Spider-Man 3.
Exactly.
He's having a nightmare and the symbiote latches onto his fears.
Yep.
And I loved this nightmare. It was so cool having the symbiote kind of like fight this like organic version of Spider-Man, and Peter's stuck between the two of them and they're pulling at each other.
Yes.
And what they do in Spider-Man 3, when he gets the suit, it cuts to black, and where is he? Hanging upside down in the city, looking at himself in the reflection of the building.
Exactly.
And it's so cool.
Yep. Nothing
touches the black suit for me. It's my favorite suit of all time. It even beats the regular suit.
Yeah.
And it has to do with the way the spider symbol looked, but it's also the blue highlighting.
Yes.
There's shots in these 3 episodes, or the 2 episodes that he's in the black suit, that looks so good.
Yep. I love the blue highlights. I think it makes everything pop. It makes him very 3-dimensional. You kind of lose the magic of the suit without those colors. And when we see Venom too, the blue and the red double highlights, it's just like,
I think that they did that probably because they wanted to accent Spider-Man's colors.
exactly.
Right? The blue and the reds to kind of balance the like, this is Spider-Man's nightmare come to life. So we're kind of bouncing him on both sides.
Exactly. And it's just like, if you take those away, you don't have nearly as an iconic costume or design.
And this is the first time with the black suit, because they didn't do it in the comic books. It was more of it wanted to enjoy Peter's powers.
Yeah.
But this is the first time where it actually affected his personality.
Yes.
Which I think was a cool way which is really how we think the symbiote is now. So this is the precedent this show set for how we think the symbiote acts and treats Peter.
Exactly.
One of my favorite shots is when the Rhino shows back up after the Kingpin tells him to go get these control rods so Smythe can work on the Prometheum X. Is when he's in his room and he puts the suit on and it has that sound effect and it like goes up over top of him and he has that like power pose.
Yes.
Time to take care of unfinished business.
And he jumps out the window. It's one of my favorite things in the whole episode. It looks so good. And then they have the fight. And it's like, I remember as a kid just sitting in my Spider-Man pajamas, just watching this back to back. And he shows up and he's like, Rhino's he breaks into the government facility. He's like, oh, I dig the new threads or whatever. And he's like,
Well, it's the itsy bitsy spider, all decked out in his new threads. They ain't gonna look new for long.
He's trying to get him to fight, and then they're going back and forth. But at this point, he pulls this massive door that's enclosed the gate, and he's about to end Rhino's life.
Yes.
And he's like, what am I doing? Like, this is the first time where he realizes the symbiote is actually affecting him mentally.
Right.
And Rhino is actually afraid for his life. So I think that, and then it ends on him, on a building, right? And you see Venom's flash in the thing, and he's like, what is happening to me? And he's like, I got to get some answers. And that's how part 1 ends.
Yes. I will say, I think the symbiote saga is the best couple of episodes in the show. And it's the first season. It's like, oh man, you just like hit the nail on the head with this one. It's like, of course there's going to be more seasons after this.
And then the part 2 of that, they open up with him getting chased by police and like news reporters. And he's like, you boneheads can't catch me.
Yeah.
Now, well, the suit makes me stronger and faster than you. Right. And then they're trying to fight him. And he's like, well, my suit has cruise control and your suits. And he chucks the pole. He breaks out of the building and he's like, your suits have battery packs that blow up if they get wet.
Yeah.
So he's just full of this like angst.
Yeah.
But it's done so well. But then we realize this is the first time we realize that the suit is vulnerable to something, right? And they use the sonic blaster on him.
Right.
And then I don't know if you picked up on it, but when the suit activates itself and it pulls him away,
yes,
and then he's on the ledge and he says, oh, I must have passed out. So Peter can't control the suit, but when he's passed out, the suit acts on its own, right?
Exactly.
So that's another thing that goes into the future iterations of the black suit.
Exactly. It's like, yeah, it takes control for him. It literally does like cruise control.
Yeah. And then at that point, we get to him he goes to the Bugle. He messes with Jameson and Brock and tells Brock he's a liar.
Yes.
And all that stuff, and the police come. But then he goes to see Dr. Kirk Connors. But at this point, Kirk Connors is afraid of him because he's a wanted man. And then Spider-Man says, well, I helped you when you were desperate. Can you please just look at this suit? And this is when we learn, he takes a piece of the suit, and this is when we learn the suit is a symbiote. Bonds to people and changes them, makes the body a host.
Right.
And so Peter realizes this thing is alive. And then Kirk Connors is like, where are you going? You have to get the suit off. It's dangerous. He's like, oh, I still need it. And then he pieces out. But I think it's still a meme to this day. But when we get to the end of the episode where Kingpin gets the Shocker involved and the Shocker kidnaps John Jameson's son from the hospital.
Yes.
And they're fighting at this old abandoned, what would you call it? A church?
I would say church because it has like a bell tower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A bell tower. And then Eddie Brock follows them because he still wants part of the story.
Yep.
Christopher Daniel Barnes is my favorite Spider-Man voice. Even when I read comics, I hear it in that tone. But it's the meme of the "Get back here, Shocker!" And it's like Shocker. It's so good.
that like really intense and angry yell that he does a couple of times throughout the show is just
Yeah.
like, I'm gonna watch that again. That was fun.
Yeah. You can't escape me. It's people want it in the new Spider-Man game because he has the black suit in Marvel Spider-Man 2 and
Oh.
Shocker's still around, and people were like, you have to put this in there.
They definitely
Get
should.
back here as you're chasing Shocker or something.
Yes.
But at that point, Peter realizes he was going to, the suit acts on its own.
Yeah.
And knocks Shocker off the top of the bell tower. And he's like, what have I done? And he webs him up, he saves him.
Yep.
And this is when he gets rid of the suit and he realizes that the suit has been blocking his knowledge of its weakness.
Exactly.
Right? And he uses the bell tower as a way to remove it because it's weak to sonics and fire, as we come to later.
Right.
But then at this point, Eddie Brock has been webbed up underneath the bell tower and the symbiote falls on top of him.
Yes.
And that leads into part 3, which the ending of this episode wherein you hear Venom's voice for the first time and you only see his foot.
Yes.
And then he looks at the paper and he's like,
Enjoy the fame while it lasts.
and then it cuts and then opens up with Eddie Brock in part 3. And he's just jacked, right? He's
huge.
bench pressing, he's huge. And then he grabs the news article on the wall, crunkles it up, and then he introduces the symbiote, and the symbiote goes on top of him. And it's my favorite look of Venom of all time.
Yeah.
Nothing can touch it. I don't care about the people saying the highlights are cheesy. It's
No.
literally Venom to me.
Yep.
In the voice, we talked about this in Spectacular, but this is the right way to do a Venom voice, where the voices are overlapped and there's more alienness
Yes.
to it, rather than just you hear Eddie and then you hear like a little hiss in the back.
Exactly. No, it has to have that like the overlap and a little bit of that distortion in it. When it comes to this design, I know people will probably think it's dated and kind of cheesy, but I don't know. There's just something. I think that's what makes it actually kind of scary to me. Like the curled lip and like the jagged teeth and like, I don't know. Like I think his presence just makes it's very scary in this one.
Yeah,
Even though
he
it's
has that like roar in the back, right? When he has the tongue going,
exactly.
he has that going.
Like I do like the design of the new movies Venom. I think it's really good.
But it's missing the symbol.
It
right?
is,
There's
exactly.
something always missing.
Exactly. And this is like the closest I think you can get so far to like a perfect adaptation of Venom. And for me, I like that classic look anyways. So it just makes it even better. That kind of, we're still trying to figure out this design kind of look. That's why I like it. I think it's so endearing because they're like, we've only seen it in comics. We don't really know how it moves. We don't really know what else to do with it. And it's got to look like we can sell toys. So
Yeah. And they did just that.
Exactly.
Because at that point, this show set precedent to Venom being the greatest Spider-Man villain of all time.
Exactly.
Right? You don't see Spider-Man without Venom. Like I know Green Goblin and Doc Ock, but like Venom is
right.
what people were like, oh my God, who's your favorite villain? Venom. But this episode also, it does a lot of what Venom is known for, which is messing with Peter's mind. And he visits Aunt May, right?
Yes.
He goes to Peter's house and he's like, be seeing you, ma'am. Like he does all this like nice stuff to make Aunt May think he's a nice boy.
Yep.
And like they go out and he's like, when the Venom suit goes on top of him, it looks so good.
It's so good.
And then, but also a couple of episodes before, we get to meet Mary Jane for the first time. And
That's
they do
right.
it like in the comics where he opens the door and she's standing there and she's like, face the tiger, you just hit the jackpot.
Yep.
But at this point, him and Mary Jane are a couple, right?
Yes.
So Venom, knowing Peter's emotions, latches onto that and he meets up with Mary Jane at the theater, and then Peter's worried about Mary Jane's well-being, and then they have to disappear because Venom's watching them. So it's a whole psychology of Venom attacking Peter.
Exactly. I wanted more of that in whenever we got Spider-Man in the Raimi movie, Venom in the Raimi movie, because like Venom knows everything about Peter. Like the symbiote knows everything about Peter, and then when he gets to Eddie, you'd assume, oh, he's going to transfer all of that information over and really try to sabotage his life, to get him like to consume every single thought and every worry that he could have. And this did it perfectly. It really did.
But Sam Raimi didn't want Venom in Spider-Man 3.
Right.
He doesn't even like the character. He wanted a personal story with Sandman and Harry.
Right.
But Avi Arad stepped in
Yeah.
and was like, no, we need to sell merchandise. We need to bring people into this movie. People want the black suit because when this show finished was only like 7 years before,
Right.
because it was still airing up in the early 2000s. Because
Yes.
it started in 94 to 98, but I didn't start watching it. Like they were doing reruns of season 1 all the way to season 5 starting in 98 to like 2002.
Right.
So like, you know, it was still fresh in everybody's mind. So they're like, we need to sell toys. So he had to throw them in at the end, which
Why
would
we got
hurt
what
the
we
movie,
got.
I would think. Yeah, we got what we got. But yeah, this, you know, Peter's psychology is affected and he's like, well, how do I fight back? Right. And so he takes it to Eddie Brock and he breaks into his home and covers his walls with reports of him being fired and like, you're the horrible, he's attacking the host directly rather than Venom.
Yes. That's where this Spider-Man is like, he knows how to outsmart his enemies. I think all Spider-Men know how to do that, but this one is almost like kind of an a-hole about it. He really knows how to dig in and get like underneath their skin. I really like that about him. He's not afraid to like, well, he pulls punches, but he doesn't like pull a punch metaphorically for his enemies. He's like, I am going after you. And the other thing, even after he's done with the symbiote, he gets emotional. Like when later on when we have Goblin taking Mary Jane and he's like passionate, he's like, I'll hunt you down, like, for the rest of time. Like that is like, holy crap, he's so cool.
That emotion is in him, right? He cares about the people he loves, right? But the symbiote is only acting in anger and like vengeance to bring that out in him, where he's not normally like that, but he has it inside of him to protect the ones he loves.
Yeah, very, very strongly and passionately. That I love that about him.
And the episode ends, they're back at the shuttle. The shuttle launches and he removes the symbiote from Eddie, but he ends on saying, I've just defeated the greatest villain I've ever faced, because it's more than just a figure. It was also attached to him personally.
Right. It's all of his insecurities and the anger that he could potentially have outside, like manifested.
Right. And then it ends with him and Mary Jane on a park bench, reuniting again, talking, and then it cuts to the moon and you see Venom's silhouette in the moon. It's like it's foreshadowing he will be back, right?
Exactly.
He can't get rid of the fear.
Exactly. Oh, so good.
Yeah. And then I want to get into your thoughts, because following this is a two-parter of the Hobgoblin.
Yes.
Now I want to ask you, what is your thoughts on introducing the Hobgoblin before the Green Goblin?
For me, it was refreshing. I'd never really thought of it before. I was like, oh, the Green Goblin is like the Spider-Man villain, and then Hobgoblin's just like kind of there, but not in this case.
Voiced by Mark Hamill.
No.
Yeah, he's the Joker.
Wait.
It's Mark Hamill.
Yeah, I know who Mark Hamill is.
No, I mean, that's who Hobgoblin is.
That's what I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I like it.
When you go back and watch it again,
I will.
You'll immediately hear it.
That's great. Oh, that's so cool. I thought it was cool. He was kind of that, like, he was kind of the lackey for the Kingpin at first, and then all of a sudden he's like, no, I can do this all on my own. He became very like independent.
So for those of you who don't know who the Hobgoblin is, it's like an alter ego to the Green Goblin. He's orange. But in the comic books, because the 90s were so drawn out, Hobgoblin was at an all-time high in the comics in the late 80s, early 90s, because he was so mysterious and no one knew his identity.
Right.
And it was just drawn out. But then when they finally showed who the identity was at that certain time, it was a horrible reveal and everybody hated it.
Yeah.
Because it was Ned Leeds, and that's not who people thought would be the Hobgoblin. Because he had so many different personas. Like he had people disguising themselves as the Hobgoblin to kind of throw people off their tracks. But I think this show did a great job in introducing the Hobgoblin as a villain and kind of delving into that mystery a little bit.
Yeah.
But also making his identity more personal in the later seasons.
Yes. Yeah, because throughout the whole thing, I'm like, I have no idea who this could be. He was like a very formidable adversary for Spider-Man too.
Very evil.
Yes. Just like plain evil.
Plain evil.
Yeah. It was great.
Yeah. He also has a great laugh. As much as we're going to talk about the Green Goblin's voice, his voice is obviously has a great laugh. It's Joker.
Right. Exactly.
But it's more like, it's like that deeper kind of like, then he gets into it more. It's not straight Joker, but it's more Goblin, deeper kind of vibe.
Yes.
I think it was a great choice to do Hobgoblin first so that we can build Harry and Norman Osborn out. Because we don't see Green Goblin until season 3.
Yeah.
So we get that Harry Peter relationship. We get Norman Osborn. becoming enemies and friends with people in Oscorp.
Yep.
And so we have that whole relationship of him building up his company, building who he is as a character, relating to Peter, Harry, Mary Jane, all that stuff, because Harry goes into a relationship with Mary Jane and there's that whole consequence there. But then Norman knows all about this stuff.
Yep.
So when it comes to season 3, we really have a grasp on all these characters and who affected Norman's life. So I think that was a great way to prolong, because people were waiting for him, right?
Yes.
In the comics, you just had, the death of Gwen Stacy
Right.
years prior, right? And the Green Goblin was the cause of that. So like people were waiting to see when the Green Goblin's going to show up.
Yeah.
And I think it was a great way to hold off and introduce all these other villains first.
Yeah, that's a good point, because for me, I'm always waiting to see when the Green Goblin's going to show up. It's like, okay, we have all the characters ready. Like here are the players in the stories. When's it going to happen? Oh, it's okay. I don't need him right now. I have all these other great villains to tide me over, especially Hobgoblin. So I think that's a good combination. Introducing the characters and the stories for the Green Goblin, but having the Hobgoblin as the villain first.
Because the Hobgoblin suit transforms into the Green Goblin suit
Yes.
in season 3, which is super cool.
So he used like the pumpkin bombs and they melted or like
No, and we're jumping ahead a little
yeah,
bit.
we are. Yeah.
And Enter the Green Goblin in season 3, Norman's working on a project with his scientist.
Yep.
And an explosion happens and the gas,
That's
the
great.
gas that creates the goblin
Yep.
leaks into, obviously spreads throughout
The facility.
Oscorp,
Yeah.
the facility, and enters the Hobgoblin's chambers where, the suit is and the glider and the bombs, and it kind of morphs the Hobgoblin suit into the Green Goblin suit.
That's right. That's super
Yeah.
cool. It's great.
And then we have the Goblin War with him versus the real Goblin, the Green Goblin. It's so good. But yeah, to end the season 1 after the Hobgoblin, you have Chameleon.
Yes.
And when I think this show, obviously it's one-offs for the villains at the start, but it goes into, you're building all this stuff for the first 2 episodes of season 2, which is Neogenic Nightmare and the Insidious Six.
Yeah.
And this is another thing where everyone knows it's called the Sinister Six, but in the 90s, the censorship wouldn't allow them to say Sinister.
I was gonna
So they have
ask
to
you.
call it Insidious Six, which I don't mind. I think it's still a cool name.
It works.
When it was Sinister Six later, because this is my first iteration of Spider-Man, I thought they were called the Insidious Six.
Right, exactly.
Right? Going off, but jumping into season 2, what is your favorite part of season 2? Neogenic Nightmare. Before you answer, to give
Yes.
everybody a grasp, this is all about Peter's mutagenic blood.
Yes.
And diving into characters like Morbius, the X-Men make an appearance because the animated series was so hot, and they're like, oh, let's find a way to introduce all these Marvel characters, right?
Yep.
But they did it in a smart way, because he's having problems with his powers.
He's getting like the cramps, essentially.
Something's happening to him, and his blood is changing.
Yeah.
But he wants answers, so he goes to see Professor Xavier because he deals with mutants, so he thinks he's a mutant. So I think that's a great way to introduce the X-Men.
Yes.
And obviously you have the classic X-Men every time he goes there, and it's great.
Yep.
But yeah, the show starts off with the Insidious Six. It's a 2-parter, and they capture Spider-Man. I have this also on VHS. The 2-parter is great, and it's Peter losing his powers. He doesn't understand why. He's slowly unable to stick to walls, but like he can shoot webs because he has web shooters in the show.
Right.
But he's not strong enough to
do any of like the swinging, lassoing. Yeah.
His spider sense is going out. Oh, speaking of spider sense, it's the best spider sense in all of any show.
It is.
I don't care what anybody says. It's too good. The reverse colors.
Yes.
Right. And the sound effect alone is it. That's the only thing I hear.
Yep.
I know there's like it has all these other sound effects, but it's the only sound effect I hear.
Yes.
And we'll play it right now. We're going to play it in the background so everybody can get an understanding of what it is.
Something's wrong.
And I love the like the painted look of the background. It's so good. That iconic for me, even though I just watched it.
But you watched a couple episodes.
I did, and I remember like when we would hang out. You'd put on like the Symbiote Saga. We'd watch that a few times before. I'd say okay. So for me, in season 2, I did like those 2 episodes with the Insidious Six. I liked that idea of him like grappling with losing his powers and trying to overcome that. I would say my favorite part of this whole season is the X-Men episode.
The first X-Men episode, right?
The
Not
first
the second part. I don't like the second one. When
what do they do?
The one guy, the one scientist turns into the monster. I never liked that one. I always liked the first one.
What's-
It's a two-parter.
Oh, that one is awful.
Yeah, and the Hobgoblin enters. He breaks into the facility to steal the codes, right?
Yes.
The secrets.
That one, I had a
And they have
hard time
Spider-Man
watching
and
that
Beast hung up and over the acid.
one. Right.
Yeah, that's that one. Like I'll watch, but like the first one is clearly superior.
Yes, and the reason I like it is because of the way they introduce Beast. So Spider-Man's frustrated that Professor Xavier can't help him or seemingly chooses not to, and he kind of like storms off and swings away. And they're all like, he'd be so cool like to have on our team.
And Wolverine's like, who needs him?
Yeah, and then Beast is like, well, he was never born a mutant, but he was given these powers, so maybe he doesn't like the changes that he's not ready for these changes that he's going through. I'm like,
Right.
holy moly, like that is such an introspective thought to have in like this kid's show. It's like, you know, you weren't born with these circumstances, but you are experiencing them now, and you're experiencing changes to them. So
Because neither was Beast, right?
Exactly.
He was a human before he turned full Beast. So he understands the connection to Spider-Man's
exactly,
struggles.
it's like it's an actual like it's empathy. It's teaching empathy to like kids watching this and they don't even know. It's like, oh, that's I think my favorite episode of the season. Everything else we'll get into. What
See, we're gonna disagree a lot.
I know.
But up until the first 8 episodes I really enjoy. After that, when they get into the Tablet of Time and all that other stuff, the Vulture, I hate. I skip every time.
Yep.
But I'm going to say right now, I absolutely love the Man Spider arc.
Yes, you do.
It's my favorite thing. And I don't know what it is, because as a kid, it's kind of scary, but I just think it's such a different take and a cool take on Spider-Man's powers.
Right.
Right. It's consequence in the most severe way for what he's going through. And I love the 6-armed Spider-Man when he has to cut holes in.
Yeah.
I love it because he has like extra arms, right? And it's so cool when they introduce the Punisher. The Punisher I'm not really a fan of. I don't really like the Punisher, but it's cool. It was a nice way for him to be introduced.
Yeah.
And hunt down, because Morbius is a thing at the time.
Right.
And another censorship thing is they couldn't say blood.
So Plasma.
Which is why Plasma was a thing. And they couldn't show him biting anybody because he's a vampire. So they had the palms. Right.
Oh,
but yeah, the 6-armed Spider-Man in the episode when Kraven comes back and he's fully Man Spider and him and Punisher have to team up to go find him. Whatever cave he was in or whatever building he was in, he had it all webbed up and he had the camera hanging there on the web.
Yes.
And like Kraven knows how to hunt. And Punisher goes to touch the camera and he's like, don't vibrate the web. And it's like, then like he looks, Man Spider, the animation was actually great.
Yes, I do remember. Yes.
It's a hard character to draw in general. And it looks so good, but I just think, I know it's ridiculous, but it's such a cool character, and I absolutely love the Man Spider.
I remember you had a Man Spider costume.
I did,
a figure. Yeah.
Yeah. I love the Man Spider arc. It's so cool because it's such like as a kid who loves Spider-Man. It's like, what is going to happen to my hero, right?
Yes.
It's like, what is happening to him, right? He's going through the most scary change possible,
right? And it sounds like it might not be reversible,
right? And he goes to Mariah Crawford for help. Like he wants a way to cure himself, but she doesn't know how, so he has all these the extra arms he grows. And at this point, this is pivotal because he's at peak relationship with Mary Jane.
Yep.
But you can't see Mary Jane like this.
Nope.
He has 4 extra arms attached to him. So he blows her off.
Multiple
she doesn't
times.
like that multiple times.
So she's just like, I'm going to go somewhere
she's like,
else.
Whatever. And at this point, later it gets into her and Harry dating because Peter, the consequences of being Spider-Man affected his personal relationship, which is also another great thing. But as the Man Spider, he goes to see her.
Yes.
Right? He breaks into the house. But he doesn't want to harm her because there's still conscious in him.
Right.
But I just love the Man Spider design, bringing Kraven back. I love Kraven as a villain.
Yes.
And just hunting him down. And then when Mariah comes back and gives him the cure to subdue, when he transforms back, it looks so cool.
Yeah.
But then when she puts his mask on and it's all ripped, I love that look.
That was cool.
The whole ripped look. And because Punisher wants to get rid of him, right? He wants to take care of him. But Kraven says no, he doesn't. Kraven actually stops him.
Right.
And Mariah's like, he's still a human.
Yep.
He's a person.
He Kraven's, taking what he's learned from Spider-Man from his situation. Okay, so Brian, I'm gonna say this. You actually convinced me about Man Spider.
It's so cool.
That's a really cool perspective of it, because like we know now, like I'm coming at this in 2023 as a 30-year-old dude. I'm like, this is weird. But I think I was mostly concerned with this season because of the Morbius storyline.
Yeah.
And it detracted from the Man Spider story. Like the way you described it, it's like the actual story behind it, really cool. The delivery based on its timeline with like Morbius, I'm like, it's fallen behind. But now that you've put this like different perspective of like, oh yeah, this is Spider-Man might not come back from this. If I was watching this now week by week, I'd be like, Spider-Man's not going to come back. This is going to be the end of Spider-Man.
Because they end the one episode where Punisher's hunting him. They end it in the warehouse, and he transforms into the Man Spider, and that's when they end it.
Right.
And it's so scary.
Yep.
But they also introduced Felicia in season 1, but Felicia and Morbius have a real relationship, and it carries through the whole show.
It does.
And I think dealing with Morbius in a way it was Peter's mistake, right? Morbius was curious about, they wanted to get the science position.
Yes.
Right? And
they're competing.
They're competing for the scholarship from Kirk Connors.
Yes.
So Morbius was Michael Morbius. He was curious about what Peter was doing. And so now at this point, he steals something from Peter's locker, which is his blood.
Yep.
And so he's testing that in, his above the building in the attic. Where he's testing neogenics again.
Yep.
I don't mind Michael Morbius as much as you don't like him.
Yeah.
But I think it's such a cool way because it's all Peter's fault. Michael Morbius and Peter's dealing with his own problems, so he's trying to study his own blood to fix it himself, which is insane.
Yeah, it is.
But Morbius is his own making, so he's trying to figure himself out, but also trying to save Michael Morbius because he knows how much Morbius means to Felicia.
Right.
And he's hunting down Felicia, but he's now a bat, like he's a vampire. And so this whole thing, but he's also battling. There's a lot of arcs happening at once.
Yes.
So I don't think it's as convoluted as you make it seem.
No.
Week to week, it's not as heavy as watching it all in a matter of like 2 hours, right?
Yes.
But I think it's a great way this Man Spider was a great way to segue more into Peter.
Yes.
And then transitioning back into Morbius later, because it ends. I don't watch anything really past after he stops being Man Spider because it goes back into, Blade comes in. I'm not a big fan of Blade.
Right.
I never even watched the movie. Like I wasn't a huge fan of Blade, but this goes into trying to cure Morbius.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a middle point for Peter to deal with himself and come back to Morbius.
Yes.
And really dive into the problems of neogenics. And then you get into Morbius actually hits himself again by accident with the neogenic recombinator.
Yep.
Which is the machine that activates people's
mutant genes.
Yeah, mutant genes. And then he turns himself into a full bat.
Yes.
And it ends on him going into a cave and not knowing if he'll ever be human again.
I really like that design.
The bat form? Yeah,
yes,
it's really cool.
So good. And then we see it again in like season 5 again. And I was like, sweet.
Season 4,
that's right.
Because they come back, they go back to Felicia and Morbius or in Blade.
Yes.
And doing all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we're not even going to talk about the rest of season 2 with Vulture and stuff. I just think it's dumb. The animation also dips hard after Man Spider. I don't know if you noticed.
I did notice. It was brutal. And like with Vulture flying it around the city, I'm like, ooh, it's just like.
Although I do have to say, when Peter becomes an old man, it's very cool. Because Vulture saps his powers.
Oh yes,
and he becomes old. I think that's that's a redeeming aspect of that kind of story arc, because you get to see Peter dealing with the fact that he can't go back home. He's old. He has no powers. He's frail. He doesn't know where to go.
Yep. Doesn't he go to his house and sees Aunt May?
Yeah, she gives him a tea or like coffee.
Yeah, they sit on the porch.
Yeah. And then he realizes how sweet she is, right? Because
exactly.
He gets to see it through another person's eyes because she doesn't know it's Peter.
Exactly. That was probably one of the better parts of that arc, but the rest, like of the Tablet of Time, I was like, oh, this needs to stop.
I don't like the Silvermane stuff. It's not as good as Spectacular.
Not at all.
I skip it every time. I'm like, I don't need this. But I think they did it. The finale where Vulture and Scorpion come back, I think it's a clever way, but it's kind of just one and done. When he sucked Spider-Man's powers, he also sucked the the man spider gene out of him.
Yes.
So he becomes a man spider and flies away. So I think that was a nice way to get rid of it.
Right.
But the last 4 episodes of the season are very weak. So before we hit season 3, season 2 ends on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And Peter goes to see Mary Jane. She tells Mary Jane tells Peter to meet her because she's going to meet her father for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter is late.
Yes.
And there's always consequences with Peter. And he sees her go off with this man, but then she disappears. So opening season 3, they have the Doctor Strange episode.
Mm-hmm.
And we have Baron Mordo. And Baron Mordo is disguised himself. He runs a cult, and he's disguised himself as Mary Jane's father, or like manipulated her mind to think that's her father.
Yeah, he manipulates people's minds to like whoever they want them to be,
Right.
essentially.
And so we get introduced to Doctor Strange. And back in the day, I didn't really care about Doctor Strange. And he's cool now because of the Marvel movies, but I still don't care about this episode.
Right.
Because it's not, Peter loses Mary Jane twice. Technically, this is the first time, but I don't really count it because the other 2 are so pivotal to the story.
Yes.
But I usually skip this episode. But episode 2, I really enjoy when he meets the fan, the biggest fan. And he meets her at her house, and he talks about his powers.
Oh, yes.
The Make-A-Wish episode.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? He goes to meet this little girl. And I just think it's such a nice, refreshing point for Peter to realize not everybody hates him.
Exactly. Because, yeah, he's at a low point, technically, like in terms of his public image.
Even his own personal life.
Yeah, he wants to kind of like throw in the towel because everything's crumbling with Mary Jane and with work as well.
It's all a mess.
It's all a mess. It's just a
always
mess. Yeah.
So I think this is a nice episode to really bring everything back grounded. Because Doctor Strange, it was so mystical. And he eventually gets Mary Jane back. But this one, it was so nice him talking to her about, how he got the power, showing her the web shooters, taking her for a web swing. I just think it was so cool. The episode after that, like when Doc Ock comes back and mind controls Spider-Man, it's a nice episode, but I just usually skip it.
Yeah.
Green Goblin comes in real soon.
Yes. You kind of just want to get to that.
Yeah. And we get to enter the Green Goblin, and you can tell the budget is high.
Yes.
For this episode, because we've been waiting for this for so long. And it's such a great episode because, again, it plays into the Raimi trilogy, the first movie, where Norman, when he becomes the Green Goblin through an accident, he goes to gather up all the people that did Norman wrong in his life because the Green Goblin's now taken over. Instead of, killing them like in the Raimi universe, he kills them all. But he brings them all to put them on trial, right? And the last person he grabs is Mary Jane because she's done Harry wrong.
Exactly.
Right? This whole thing. And then I love Green Goblin's voice and the dynamic between, like, when he's fighting, he's like, he always calls him Osborn, and he's like, I'm not Osborn anymore.
Yes.
He's talking like the Green Goblin, but there's and whenever the mask comes off, I feel like the cloud is lifted and Norman is like coming back.
Yep.
Wait, that's Peter Parker, the friend of my son Harry. Shut up, Osborn. I'm trying to think.
I love this version of the Green Goblin, and it was such a good way to introduce obviously the biggest threat of this season, and then obviously going forward.
There's a lot at stake. It's not just like the other people that are in trouble. Mary Jane's there.
Peter, he has Felicia Hardy's mom. He has Jameson because he wrote bad things about him in the paper.
Yep.
And then he has Kingpin. He has basically every top tier character we've
right now. Does Peter know that it's Norman?
He thinks it's Harry.
He thinks it's Harry.
He's spying on him, right? Because he's seen the Goblin Glider before with the Hobgoblin, so he knows where it comes from. But then he sees Harry looking through schematics and stuff of like Goblin gear, so he thinks it's Harry.
That's right.
So when they're fighting and he removes it, he says, "Okay, Harry," but it's Norman Osborn, and he's like just shocked. And then Harry comes at the end of the episode because he found an underground tunnel passage to this secret base.
Right.
But yeah, he finds out it's Norman.
Right.
So from there we go to Framed, which is the Daredevil episodes. I really enjoy the Daredevil episodes.
Yes.
It's a nice twist from the dramatic Goblin, Doctor Strange, Doc Ock. It brings it back down to consequence for Peter's life because it's no longer Spider-Man, because he works for Fisk.
Yes.
At this point, he finds a new Fisk, offers him a job. He doesn't know he's
essentially
Kingpin.
Yes, and he's just essentially downloading information from the computer to these discs.
Yeah. data discs.
Data discs, yeah. Like it's a CD-ROM, but
Yeah.
okay.
It's so much cooler as a data disc.
Yep.
But yeah, we find out that he gets framed from Wilson Fisk's son.
Yes.
This is the first time where Peter's being hunted rather than Spider-Man.
Right.
And we get introduced to Matt Murdock, who's going to be his lawyer.
Yeah.
And then you have the whole dynamic. I love Daredevil and Spider-Man's dynamic. It's just so cool.
Yes. I find it's so funny that like they're technically oblivious to like their secret identities. It's so cheesy to me, but it's like,
Well, no, because Daredevil actually points out, because Daredevil says he can see everything, right? And then Spider-Man at the end of the episode says, well, do you know who I am? And he's like, no, I respect your privacy. I'm not going to do that.
yes. Yeah. So it's like he probably knows,
Yeah, but he's
like, he's upstanding enough to not do it.
understand Spider-Man's morals, right?
Yeah, I love their dynamic. I thought that was like a really strong part of that arc. for
Daredevil
sure.
looks so good
He does.
in the show. He
Yes.
looks so good.
Like the black with the red highlights.
Yeah,
Oh, it's good.
it's
Well,
pimp.
it's like a mixture of black and red at like 50-50. It's cool.
I think it's more a red suit and the black is
And the
the,
black.
the highlight. Yeah. the
Yes.
highlight. But yeah, it looks so good.
It's very
And when
cool.
they do the Daredevil vision, it looks so
It's-
cool.
yes.
The all red and you can like see highlights and stuff.
Yep.
It's really cool.
I love
But yeah,
that one.
overall, that was a great two-parter. I love watching that one. I also had that one on VHS. It wasn't in the clamshells like all the other ones. It was like the cardboard
Oh,
VHSs.
nice. Yes.
So I had that one. I watched that a lot. But then after that, we get to Return of Venom.
Yes.
Venom returns, and then we get Carnage for the first time. And now, what I like about this is we introduce Carnage and Venom again, but we bring back Dormammu, which I don't really care about, or not Dormammu. We bring back Baron Mordo, who wants to bring Dormammu back.
Yes.
What I like about it in a way, because we didn't really need Dormammu to be in this episode at all, because Venom and Carnage are superior on their own.
Yes.
But it was a nice little Easter egg to get us used to the portals, which with the
Yes.
the device that they use later with Goblin in
Exactly.
the next coming episodes. But I think Carnage, this is the only way I see and hear Carnage as well.
I do too.
Think of the damage we can do now, man!
Because even in the Venom Let's Be Carnage movie that came out a couple years ago,
Yeah.
I was so disappointed that his voice was all deep.
And once I kill that thing that made me, we will be indestructible.
Yes.
And like Venom like, and I was like, no, it's supposed to be high and manic and like
Exactly.
chaos, right?
Yes.
Not low register. But then that's just me being like, okay, this is the only way Carnage can exist, right?
Right. Exactly.
With that laugh and like being crazy and insane.
Yes. I thought he was quite scary in this
Yeah.
in the show.
Because they couldn't go full Carnage because it's a kid's show, but they did it in a way where he's just sucking life force from them to bring Dormammu back.
Yes.
But this episode also introduced War Machine and Iron Man.
Right. Yes.
And they didn't bring back Doctor Strange, which was odd because it's Baron Mordo.
Right.
But they wanted to. I think Iron Man was more of a pivotal point at that point because he had the animated show, and that was kicking off. The designs of War Machine and Iron Man in the 90s, they can't be touched.
They're great. I
They
love
look so good.
Yep.
It looks so good. Baron Mordo introduces that the symbiote had a host,
Yes.
and it split off, and then Cassidy gets the symbiote, and I just love his like. He's always like eyes wide open. His hair's all crazy. He's like crazy. He's like manic.
Yep.
He's like, come on, man. He's like, I want to create glorious carnage throughout the land. And he's like, carnage, eh? And he's like, and so the suit just like wraps onto him. And it fully becomes like, he doesn't even consider himself as we. It's more I because they're so in sync with each other, the symbiote and Cassidy.
Yes.
Oh, it's so good.
Because with Eddie, it was they were kind of like working together ish. Like Venom's feeding off of Eddie, but in this one, it's like Cassidy is 100% into just being taken over by the symbiote. It's so cool.
It's great.
Oh.
And then when Carnage first shows up, he's like, there's another symbiote. He's like, he calls him Dad. I love when he calls
Yes.
Venom Dad. But then he's like, I'd hoped we'd see you again. And he's like, I know you. And then he pulls back the mask and it's Cassidy.
Yeah.
I love when they reveal faces with the
Yes.
symbiote. It's just so cool.
Yep.
But what I loved about this is Venom slowly becoming an anti-hero,
Yes.
right? Because in part 2, Carnage is now, Venom doesn't want to deal with it. He's like, why did Dormammu send you? It's like, I was supposed to be,
Yeah.
but then Carnage is now the one in control. And because Eddie has a relationship with his psychologist
Oh, that's right.
in the prison, right?
Yes.
And so he's still fighting the symbiote wanting to be back taking him over, right?
Yep.
And so he goes to see Dr. Kirk Connors to get it removed, but it's so bonded with him that he might not make it if he makes another bonding.
Yes.
Because he just wants to be with Ashley.
Right.
And then Carnage calls him a sentimental old fool. It's so good.
That's so great. Oh my god.
But then we get a team up with Spider-Man, Venom, and Iron Man. It's so cool.
Like the premise of all of these stories are like so insane. They're so intense. And then like some of the execution, one because it's in the 90s, two because budget, and three because it's a kid show, it almost falls short because I feel like the like Baron or Dormammu, I just can't. Like I wish Dormammu and Baron Mordo were not in that episode and Carnage just was his own thing, wanting to just make Carnage, like just go nuts on the city, take everybody's power, and then him and Venom kind of work together, and then Venom is like...
He needs Spider-Man too, because at the time Maximum Carnage was a comic,
yes,
but it was so bad. People did not like it. It was a terrible run of Carnage as a comic book, so this was kind of a way to bring him back to light.
Yes.
But they also had to keep pushing the story to come because the next couple episodes have to do with the portals. This is a way to bring in the dimensions.
Yes.
But I also agree with you where I wish it was just Venom and Carnage.
Yeah.
Because those two are enough to deal with 3 episodes on their own.
Absolutely. And like that whole dynamic of Venom being like, holy moly, this guy's nuts. And then slowly becoming that anti-hero that he is. Like, yeah. But other than that, the fight with Iron Man and War Machine, just great.
Because I love when Eddie has control of the symbiote. Like, you can hear voices in his head, and then he, like, removes the mask, and he's Eddie again. But then when he wants to get serious, he puts the mask back on. It's so cool. He sacrifices himself for Ashley to save her, and they both go into the portal.
Yes. It was good, because he was getting, like, the shakes, and he was, like, in withdrawals, essentially. It was cool.
I loved when he knocked over the cylinder that was holding the symbiote in Connor's lab, and he just jumps in it, and it's like latches onto him, and he just pops right up, and then he grabs a hold of Spider-Man, and he's like, "Just listen to me, like we're supposed to be, partners." And then when he says we're partners for now, it's like, oh, it's so cool. Venom and Spider-Man being partners. But yeah, overall, great couple episodes with Venom and introducing Carnage. The idea of other dimensions is introduced, but it segues well into the very next episode, which is a fitting topic because Beyond the Spider-Verse came out, and one of the main antagonists is the Spot.
Yes.
And so going back to this episode, I also went back and watched it because this is one I usually skip on rewatch when I was growing up because I didn't really care. But going back, it's such a cool like revelation seeing what was and using him now. So because I know you were excited to watch it to see the differences, what they did with him. So what did you think of the Spot episode?
You know what? I did actually enjoy it. Again, putting the campiness aside, I liked that it was just a simple, very meek scientist being sort of controlled by Fisk, having this amazing technology, it going a little bit awry, and then utilizing it to his advantage, but being very bad all of a sudden.
Because he wanted to fund all his project, right? He was treated so poorly by Fisk, right? He saw the potential in his newfound powers.
Exactly. He almost he was like, wait a minute, this is actually like the best thing ever.
Yeah. You also have 23 minutes to do an episode.
Exactly. So. It's you can't do like I'm gonna slowly change history with this technology. I'm just gonna steal a bunch of money. I think the way they did like the portals was super cool. Again, it was another like Spider-Man villain that Peter is really like has a hard time going up against. He can essentially bend reality. His swinging is useless. Like he's got to go at it a different way. He's got to approach defeating him a different way.
I loved when they showed the inside of the portals, like him floating in the inside.
Yes.
Because they never have done that, right?
Exactly.
They always just show the other end of the punch coming through the portal or whatever.
Exactly.
But when he realizes that his spider sense has to save him, it's like
so
you can use my eyes, but not my spider sense. And he's like, he immediately finds the one end of the portal that connects to another portal, and he uses that to his advantage. So he uses his own senses to distinguish the portals, which is really cool.
Yes, love that. I think for being a 20 something minute episode, they hit all the right beats to tell a good villain origin and conclusion story.
Yeah. definitely. And it's cool to go back to it, but definitely do you obviously we prefer the new Spot, right? Because obviously there's more to do with him, right? The next movie is going to be insane
Right.
in his evolution, but I think this was a cool introduction to a character people obviously didn't know about, and it was like
Yeah.
obviously getting the idea of these portals building into obviously the next 2 episodes, which is peak
Yes.
of this show, right? I think we'll hop over Goblin War because Turning Point is easily one of the greatest episodes of this show.
When you said get ready for Turning Point, I was like, you were not wrong in saying that. It's
Turning Point, it's labeled what it is. It's the pivotal turning point in the show.
Yes.
And it brings Peter Parker and Norman Osborn head to head once again. At this point, Norman has the portal device miniaturized so he can like travel through dimensions really fast.
Yep.
In different parts of the city. So he uses this to spy on Spider-Man. And he finds out Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And then at this point, him and Mary Jane are like at the height of their relationship. They're back together, right? Harry's no longer in the picture.
Oh,
And
because
she's
he like
"No,
went
Mary
away.
Jane hurt Harry, right? He hurt Harry with Mary Jane.
Yep.
And then this is one of the episodes we get introduced to Madam Web,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I think it was a couple episodes before. It might have been Goblin War we get introduced to
It was
her.
Goblin War. Yes.
But
I think so.
she brings him in, and I love Madam Web. I don't know if you know this, but Stan Lee's wife voices Madam Web.
No kidding. Okay. That's
so it's
pretty
very
cool.
cool.
Yeah.
And so she's like a omnipotent being.
Yeah. Multiversal being.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
has all these powers, but she uses these cards like
Like
what are
tarot
those?
cards.
Tarot cards.
Yeah.
And she talks about the villain with the 2 heads,
Yes.
right? And Peter doesn't know what she's talking about. And it's so good. The storytelling in this episode is crazy.
Yep.
So they get invited. Norman invites them to dinner at his house to celebrate Harry or something. It's something small like that. And they're like, okay, we have to go. And Mary Jane comes as his date.
Yes.
And then the whole time, Norman's just like, so Harry or Peter, you two begin conspiring to get together. All
Yes.
this time. It's like slowly. And I think we haven't touched on it yet, but I don't know how you feel, but I absolutely love the inner dialogue with Peter Parker. I know it's sometimes a thing for you, but it's what Peter does in the comics. It's what he does in all the other shows. But it's for a moment where the audience, it's like realizing that the exact same time Peter is. And I think it's such a great way for the audience to be connected to Peter because they're thinking the same thing.
Yes.
And Peter's going through all these emotions without having to speak. Obviously for animation purposes, they don't have to move the mouth.
Right.
But like, it's insane when he realizes he does know I'm Spider-Man.
Yes.
Because he's like, oh, we have a little secret, you and I. And it's just a villain that takes it to the peak of Peter's and then just tears him right down.
Exactly.
Because he has to figure out what to do next, right? Like, how does he get out of this
He's
situation?
literally at the dinner table being interrogated by Norman, and he's like, oh, he totally knows. What do I do now? And then he tries to excuse himself and goes to the bathroom or whatever.
Yeah, because Mary Jane doesn't know. Nobody knows.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
He's like, he's going to spill the beans. Like, what am I supposed to do? And then he tosses one of his web cartridges in the fire,
Yes.
which is another scientific thing. It's like, okay, I can distract. I know the chemicals will explode if it's conducive to heat.
Exactly.
And he caused an explosion. And at this point, the animation just like kicks into a whole gear.
Yes, it
I
does.
love the outside fight.
Yes.
He's like going into, he rescues Mary Jane and all the people get out. And Mary Jane's, where are you going? He's like, Norman's still in there. I got to go find him. And like when Goblin walks through the smoke and he's like, I'm tired of you. He's like, Goblin's like, I'm tired of you messing with the plans. He's like, I'm getting rid of you once and for all. And then Peter's still in a suit.
Yep.
And then they fight. They go into the outside in the backyard. And he's like, oh, perfect. No one can see me back here. And he gets hit. And then he's like, I got to try to get my web shooters. Because he's still in his... It's crazy because it's the first time we've seen Peter do like anything Spider-Man related without wearing his costume.
He always...
underneath.
Right, because he always pulls off his upper, like, top stuff and pulls the mask down. But yeah, he doesn't have it right there. Yeah.
So he's trying to get out and then Goblin wraps him up in the wire, but it's too strong of a cable, so he can't break it.
Yes.
But what I love is when... It's obviously another comic book reference when he takes off and Peter's dangling from the glider.
Yes.
But when the suit is all ripped to shreds, like his tux,
yeah,
it looks so cool. And
it
then
does.
he's trying to get his web shooter and he puts it on and he hooks the web onto something and Goblin goes. He cuts the wire off Goblin's one of the lasers, and then when they reach the Brooklyn Bridge,
yes,
right,
yep.
and then he breaks free of the lasers, and then he's like, I gotta make this count, whenever. And he rips it open, and the suit comes full, and then you hear the da da da.
Yes.
The score we'll get into in a bit, but
Yep.
the score of this show is what makes it so iconic for me.
I agree.
and
I
the
agree.
different tones, and it's full orchestra.
Yep.
But when he puts the mask on and it's go time
Yep.
for it to fight Goblin, it's crazy.
It is. It is. Yeah, this is definitely an episode that I would go back to multiple times. There's stakes, there's so much tension, and you're at a point in the show where, again, so many things are going wrong for Peter. Like, he could be exposed, everybody in his life that he cares about could be in danger, and it's just one of those episodes that it's like, oh yeah, this is Spider-Man. This is what he has to deal with all the time. But it does it so well. Because we've seen it. We've seen stuff like this before, but it's not to the same level. It's not this intense.
At that point, after they fight for the first time, Goblin goes to visit his co-conspirators.
Yes.
Right? So he's freaking out because Goblin is using the portals and he can be anywhere in microseconds.
Yes.
And Peter hightails it back to Aunt May's house because he thinks that's where Norman's going.
Yep.
He gets there first, and then Goblin comes in. He's like, oh, look at her. She's so sleeping. I would hate to wake her.
Yes.
And he's like, oh, I'll visit another one of your co-conspirators. And then Peter doesn't know what he's talking
He's like,
about.
what is
He's
that?
like, another one of my co-conspirators. And then he realizes it's Mary Jane.
Yep.
And that's when he goes to Mary Jane's house. Goblin's there. He kidnaps Mary Jane. Spider-Man's late.
Yep.
The Goblin gas is in there still. And then he realizes, you hear the Goblin laugh.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mary Jane's being dragged out. And he's carrying her, right? Because she's unconscious. It's
Yes.
such a... It's a haunting image of Mary Jane being lifeless in Goblin's arms.
Where's Mary Jane?
And we get to the point where they're fighting on the bridge, and the bridge begins to crack in the middle, and then him and Mary Jane get separated, and she falls off the edge of the bridge.
Yep.
And Christopher Daniel Barnes, he gives a performance like no other.
Yep.
And he goes to web over the side of the bridge, and Mary Jane's not there.
Yep.
Because what he doesn't know is she fell into
To
the
a
portal device.
Yes.
And so he yells Mary Jane. It's classic.
Yes.
Anytime you hear Mary Jane, all you hear is Christopher Daniel Barnes.
Mary Jane! Mary Jane!
And he jumps into the water and he's searching for her, and he's like, I can't find her. So help me, I can't find her. And he's like losing his mind. And then he gets back up, and the Goblin starts laughing. He's like, how dare you? That was the woman I loved. And he webs onto the glider, and he like pulls himself up.
Yep.
And they have this huge brawl, and he's like, nothing can keep me from you. It's like,
Yes.
I will find you. And then they have this whole thing back and forth where the portal's open, and he's like, I can stick to the ground. You can. He feels nothing for him at this point. He's like, I don't care what happens to you. The woman I love is gone, and it was all because of you.
Yep.
And at this point, the mask comes off the Green Goblin, and then Norman comes back, and then Peter
He's
turns
like,
back
oh,
the clock.
he's like, I can't do this to him.
Yeah, he can't. He's like, hold on, Norman. And then at this point, the Goblin's laugh comes back, and you can see the eyes turn, and then he starts laughing, and he's like, oh, I'm not Osborn anymore.
Yep.
And then this is when the glider comes, and Spider-Man's sense goes off, and he dodges it, and it collides with Norman, and he goes into the portal and disappears.
Yep.
At this point, Peter just yells out, he's like, what's happening? Like, what's going on? He's like, he yells Madam Web, and then she teleports him back, and he's like, can you please bring them back? And then she's like, I cannot.
It can't end like this. Madam Web!
Yes, Spider-Man.
Can you bring them back? I'll do anything you want.
I can't.
Can't or won't?
This is the path you chose for yourself.
And he wants nothing to do with her anymore.
Yes.
And he forbids her from his life. He doesn't want to see her.
Doesn't want any contact.
He doesn't want nothing.
Yep.
And then we end season 3 on a broken Peter Parker.
Oh, yeah.
It's a turning point for the whole show because we get into season 4 with partners, but I don't think there's a better episode. Obviously, the symbiote stuff has a great arc, but like a more pivotal Spider-Man episode than Turning Point.
If you were to watch an episode of that show out of context for whatever reason, just to like get somebody hooked, it's that episode. Absolutely. It means so much for the series.
And it means so much to Peter Parker as a character.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because again, this is the biggest loss. A villain that's, he also lost the father to Harry at the same time.
Exactly.
Everything is coming to head. It's like Madam Web, he just banished because of all this stuff that's happening. He doesn't know what to do.
Yep.
And he's at his lowest point, which gets into season 4.
Yep.
The subject of the overall arc of the season is partners. And we're going to highlight a little bit because season 5, we both love season 5.
Yes.
But this is when Black Cat is introduced. And Felicia Hardy is the one to kind of balance the loss of Mary Jane, where Peter is now moving on with his life and realizing that he doesn't have Mary Jane anymore.
Right.
And so Felicia, as Black Cat, becomes that support system for him
Yes.
and that relationship that he needs to fill in his void that he just recently lost.
I will say throughout the whole show, I didn't really like Felicia. I thought she was just kind of like,
The rich girl.
yeah, she's a rich girl, and she had like a very like sassy voice and just wasn't like a good character. And then Black Cat shows up, and I'm like, oh, this is actually a compelling character and a good complement to Spider-Man.
Because they understand each other, right? Her powers come from her father, the Cat, working for the Kingpin, and then she gets the super soldier serum to become the Black Cat.
Exactly.
Which is different in the comics, but it doesn't matter. We're talking about
Exactly.
the show.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great way for her to realize the stakes as a hero, but
Yes.
also the consequences of being Felicia at the same time. So it's a very, when Peter's at his lowest, this was the perfect relationship for him to be in.
Right. Exactly. And I really thought that she was a good, like a well fleshed out character.
Yeah.
Like her backstory, yeah, with the super soldier serum and her dad when he was a kid having the photographic memory, taking the super soldier formula, accidentally like working with the Nazis and then running away, and him being a fugitive essentially his whole life. I don't know. I felt like this was a very strong story to have for a side character, but it's a side character that's really important for Peter, because without Black Cat, he wouldn't again find like the value in his
Partnership.
in
right?
partnership. Yeah. He's lost his partner. He's lost Mary Jane. And it's like, there's nothing else for me here.
Right. What I also think is compelling is that she lost Michael Morbius.
Yes. Yeah. So they're both finding comfort and solace
With each other.
With each other. Exactly.
Yeah. It's such a great dynamic.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're like, I almost ship them more than him and Mary Jane.
In this, yeah. And I'm sure in the comics, there's a lot of fleshed out stories between all three of them. And then people pick and choose their favorites. But I think this is like a very strong relationship compared to what you see with Peter and Mary Jane. But then again, that's the thing. The show's about Spider-Man. So we see less of Peter Parker.
In this, especially in this season, because his identity is no longer matters because the one he loves is gone. Whereas his relationship now is a Spider-Man relationship.
Exactly. Because they both don't know their identities, their secret identities.
But she teases a couple of times. It's like, how about you take off your mask, I'll take off mine.
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
There's a lot of 90s
flirty like innuendos for
hot
sure.
For you kind of stuff.
Yes.
But what I like about how their arc kind of ends is, Blade comes back and they're hunting vampires. I usually skip this episode as well, but it ends on her going to wanting to find Morbius again. Peter understands that Michael was her first love, and he understands that because Mary Jane was his.
Yes.
So he has to let her go, but they both know they love each other, and it's like the relationship will never change.
Right.
But he has to let her go so she can
what she's supposed to
do.
Yeah.
What she's supposed to do. And that, goes into Peter Parker being alone again and losing someone else.
Right.
But for a different reason. And that gets into the return of the Green Goblin.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how you feel about this episode with how the Goblin comes back to torment Harry. I think it would be almost better if Harry's rage for Peter stealing Mary Jane and over the course of the seasons manipulated him into the Goblin rather than the Goblin kind of coming back psychically to manipulate him.
I totally agree with that. I feel like this was probably a result of like maybe time crunch, maybe a little bit of underdeveloping the screenplay or like the story.
Because this is the shortest season of them all.
Yes, it's 11 episodes.
Yeah.
So that could have been the one thing I would change about the Return of the Green Goblin. It's not so much the portal goblin actually influencing Harry. It's the buildup of these 4 previous seasons of the hardship that Harry's had to go through, losing Mary Jane to Peter, losing his father, becoming friends with Peter, brushing him off because of his duties as Spider-Man, all of that stuff, and building this resentment towards him.
But what I think is fitting for the episode title to be called The Return of the Green Goblin is also the return of Mary Jane.
Yes.
And there's a couple episodes after this, but the next episode, The Haunting of Mary Jane,
Yes.
I go back to this episode quite a bit because it has Mysterio in it, but the automatons, the robots that Mysterio makes to guard his lair are all the villains that Peter has faced before. And I think it's so cool seeing them all again in this kind of circumstance.
Yep.
But Mary Jane gets kidnapped. She's an actress in the show, and they're doing a movie about this. They're restarting this movie with an actress who ended up disappearing.
She disappeared after like the accident
on the main. So she's taking her place as the actress.
Yep.
So, but in this one, at the end of the episode, they blow up Mysterio's lair. Mysterio sacrifices himself with Miranda.
Yep.
Right.
The original actress.
The original actress.
Yeah.
Who Mysterio lied to her, saying he can give her a new body.
Yes.
She believed him because she was now a cyborg, because she was only being held up with parts to keep her alive.
Yeah.
But at the end, when they blow up the whole studio of Mysterio, they're on the building, and Peter Parker reveals his identity to Mary Jane.
Oh.
And it's such a full circle moment for Peter, because he finally realizes he has to, if he wants to make this a priority in his life and have Spider-Man balance Peter Parker, he has to let his loved ones know who he is.
Exactly. You said it perfectly. That's how it is. It has to be balanced with a select few people and the people that mean it the most to him.
Yep. And then he proposes to Mary Jane.
Yeah.
And I think it's so cool. He doesn't have a ring at the time, but he gives her a spider tracer for a ring.
Yes, yeah.
Which comes into play in the next episode, but we're going to go right into season 4 because she says yes. And the opening to season 5 is the wedding episode.
Yes.
And diving into season 5, overall, there's a couple different arcs in season 5, but overall, I think it's a great cap to the show.
It is.
And, we get Harry coming back in the wedding episode to try to break it up because he still loves Mary Jane.
Yep.
But they end up getting married. The episodes after that are The Return of the Forgotten Warriors, the 6 Forgotten Warriors. And as someone who just loved Spider-Man as a kid, I thought this was so cool because we introduced Captain America, all the super soldier serums. They bring back characters from like the early 40 comics.
Yes.
And it was so cool seeing Spider-Man. It's also building us up for him to lead a team later in the season.
Exactly.
And it was introducing Peter's parents' storyline with the framing and like the spy stuff. It was so cool.
Yeah. They said they were everybody was told that they were heroes, but then there was a cover up to say that they were spies, but that the truth is they actually were not spies. It was great. I loved it.
And they went to Russia and stuff like that. So you got out of the New York setting and Peter discovering all these other heroes. Aunt May selling the house.
Yes.
She can't live in it alone. She's moving in with Mary Jane's aunt.
Yep.
But that's when Kingpin gets alerted to that because they have these keys that unlock a doomsday weapon, right? For Red Skull. And Red Skull is one of the biggest parts of this. I think it's 3-4 episodes, this arc.
I think so, yeah.
6 Forgotten Warriors.
Yes.
I think it's
4 episodes, yeah.
Yeah, 4 episodes. But yeah, it's a great start to Peter learning to work with a team, to lead a team, to know consequences of like his past. He doesn't know a lot about his parents.
Yep.
So it's a nice way for him to be like, wait a sec, you're telling lies about my family, and like there's a consequence with that, and bringing that full circle with like the 40s and the spy and chameleon.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it was a great arc, and Mary Jane like obviously is there the whole way.
Yes.
And you end with like Electro. There's some stuff where like Electro is like Red Skull's son. Kind of
right.
It's weird stuff, but like I don't really care. It was so cool where Electro is the doomsday weapon.
Yes.
Right. And then Mary Jane in that episode, it's like Peter realizes that they're a team. But it's also terrifying because she was on the building with Electro, right? And he had to like bring her home.
Yes.
And he had the mask. It's so cool seeing Peter without the mask on with Mary Jane. Like they're finally at that point in their relationship where he can trust her. He can
open up, right? It's like he could have trusted her the whole time. But it's him finally opening up.
Yeah. So she just wants him to be safe, and he has to go, take care of it. And he ends up, using the Doomsday device to control Electro to suck him in.
Yep.
Captain America comes back. It's a whole it's a great arc.
It is.
If any of you listening want to watch it.
Yep.
But following that,
the Wizard.
I love how they made the name. It was cool at the time.
Yeah, I love how they made that joke. It's like because even now, like we know Wizard. It's like that's P.
yeah. But that goes into what I think is the most, other than Turning Point, this is the most tragic the show's gonna get.
Yes.
And it's the return of Hydro Man.
Yes.
And I love these episodes so much because it brings in Black Cat again.
Yep.
Peter's lives are colliding with Spider-Man's love interest and Peter's love interest.
Yes.
But then realizing that Hydro Man's back, Mary Jane is having all these nightmares, right? She's having these visions, and he's bringing her to see Dr. Connors to get studied.
Yep.
Hydro Man kidnaps her and brings her somewhere. So Peter has to go through her nightmare to realize where she was, because it's where she was when she came back to find Peter,
Right.
which is so cool.
It is. It's like a mystery episode.
Yeah.
It was great. I loved it.
And then we get the big ball drop where Miles Warren comes into play, and he is the scientist known for cloning. And we find out Hydro Man is a clone because he found the substance, his remains from season 1 on a rooftop to reform himself, because Hydro Man has the ability to reform himself with the water. So he uses that as a way to push his cloning even further. And what do we find out? Mary Jane is also a clone.
Yes.
And because her and Hydro Man are two of the same coin, because he formed Mary Jane from Hydro Man's molecules. So they're meant for each other, because this whole time, Hydro Man, he's like, we're made for each other. We're made for each other. She doesn't understand, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And we find out that the clones are unstable, and Hydro Man slowly disappears, and Peter turns around, and Mary Jane is dissolving in front of him.
Oh.
And she's turning into like she's evaporating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? The molecules are fading. And again, like, we have to give credit to the voice actors, because Mary Jane's voice actress, she gives an incredible performance here.
Yes.
I want you to know just one thing. If any part of me is anything like the real Mary Jane Watson, she loves Peter Parker more than anything in the world. More than anything.
If any part of me is like the real Mary Jane, just know that she loves Peter Parker more than anything in the world. Like, it's so sad.
It is. And it's so like, it's that old school, like, dramatic, theatrical performance. It's like, other parts of the show, when they pulled that, I was not into it. But this one, it's just like, yes, this is like how Mary Jane would do this. It's theatrical, it's heartfelt, and it's...
'Cause she's an actress.
Yeah, exactly.
And she loves him.
Exactly. Yeah.
And at this point, you just ripped another part of Peter's life from him again.
Yeah.
He just married the love of his life. He finally got her back, and now you're ripping it from him. And the performance Christopher Daniel Barnes gives here is also like, dude, you're crushing it in the booth. Like, it's so haunting.
Yep. When the whole facility explodes, so we see Mary Jane evaporate and she like melts away, and then the facility explodes. I'm like, does Peter even care about escaping now? Like,
No.
That's what's running through my like, oh,
That's his last leg.
yeah, that's it. That's he was fulfilled essentially before this all happened, and now it's being ripped away from him. So it's like, what does he do? What's he living for now?
Which then it ends with, him going out and Madam Web returns.
Yes.
And
Yep.
right when he's at his lowest, he wants nothing to do with anything, because, again, he just lost Mary Jane for the second time.
Yeah.
But for good, it feels like.
Right.
Because he doesn't know where the real one is.
Yep.
But Madam Web takes him, and she wants to put him through a test. And he's like, I'm tired of your tests. I don't want it. And then she introduces the Beyonder.
Yes.
And we get into the little adaptation of Secret Wars.
Yep.
I love this so much.
I do too.
It's
I do
so
too.
cool.
I was like, oh, this is like, it's like a game.
Yeah, it's like a chess game.
Yeah. I forgot the premise of Secret Wars at first, because I'm thinking, oh, it's like a war, but no, it's a game essentially.
Yeah.
And it's I really, really liked it. And we get like Doom, Doctor Doom.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I love Doctor Doom.
Yeah, he's so cool.
He is so cool. He's actually, you think of him as like, oh, maybe he's got his like head on his shoulders nicely, and he wants to actually make this civilization like a persistent utopia. He's just misguided by all of the power that he has, and then it crumbles in front of him.
He's a great villain.
He is. Oh,
When Beyonder tells Peter that he's putting him to the test for good against evil, and that he's moved time forward to destroy this planet.
yeah.
Peter's like, how can you do that to a civilization that has known peace its whole life, and you're doing it for a game?
Right.
And it really brings Peter's character, like his personality and characteristics, out in full force, realizing that, you're just doing this. It's like, this is not how heroes work. Right?
Exactly.
You're not a hero. Who even are you to begin with? Like, you're ruining the lives of others just for your own games.
Right. And that plays into like our modern depiction of like those omnipotent beings who, like, for us nowadays, it's like, yeah, we totally understand that an omnipotent being or like this big cosmic entity is like doesn't care about individuals living an existence. Back then in the 90s, it's like, like he just like wiped out a whole like
Planet.
Like
Yeah.
it's wild. So I think like the scope of it was perfect for that time.
And we end with that segment of Doctor Doom saying, who amongst you wanted to give up your superpowers, right?
Yes.
Because Spider-Man, he gets a team together. He gets the Fantastic Four because he's really thinking about this logically. He's like, who's defeated Doctor Doom?
Yes.
Okay, let me get the Fantastic Four. He wants his friend Iron Man.
Yep.
Because he's worked with him before. He wants Captain America, Storm. He's who amongst the X-Men? He brings back the X-Men. He's like, who, there's one so powerful that she can control the very weather. So he brings Storm in. And then the Lizard is part of the villains. But he tells Mr. Fantastic that there's someone inside of him, like he's being tormented. So they bring out Kirk Connors. So like you have this whole Kirk Connors in the lizard body being an ally. It's so cool. And then Black Cat comes into play.
Yep.
But there's a butting heads, right? Because she was in the midst of a battle with Morbius
Yes.
and Blade. And she's like, how can you be so selfish bringing me into this?
Right.
But then there's such a great dynamic with her and Captain America.
Because they're both super soldiers.
Yeah. And her talking to Cap is like a full circle for her.
Yes.
And then realizing Spider-Man was only doing this for the good of mankind, but she was also like, she has to realize there's more to this than
just her, like
just her, right? But it's like, again, like Peter lost her, so he brings Black Cat in.
Yep.
But then they butt heads because Peter did this out of selfishness. He doesn't think about what she was going through.
Right.
But then it ends with them taking on Doctor Doom, and he says, who amongst you would want to give up their superpowers?
Yeah.
And this is the moment where it goes into the next 2 episodes where this version of Peter Parker is the one they got to lead.
Yes.
Because he says, he brings back the great responsibility speech, and he says, there's consequence. And it's like, if I could give up my powers in a second to be with, anybody, and the responsibility of this weight that I have, I would definitely do it.
Right.
In order to have a normal life. So it's like going from there, they realize this was the correct choice in leading what goes into the first ever Spider-Verse on screen.
Yep. Spider Wars. Oh, this is another one of my favorite arcs of the show. It was this, like, for me, it's a symbiote saga. It is, you got me onto the man spider.
Yeah.
So, then it was Secret Wars and Spider Wars for sure. Yeah. Again, the 90s, you're like, oh, multiverse.
It's so cool.
Yeah. It's our first iteration of the multiverse.
And they make a joke because they bring in Scarlet Spider.
Yeah.
Right. And at that point, he was hated in the comic books. They thought it was a horrible thing. And then when he's done telling his origin, our Spider-Man goes, well, that sounds like a bad comic book plot.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's the meta joke because it was a horrible comic book plot.
Yep.
But then you get to see, like, there's a Spider-Man with the 6 arms. So he's dealing with the mutation we've already seen. So they're bringing back other things. There's a Spider-Man with Doc Ock's tentacles.
Yes.
Spider-Ock. And then there's one with the spider armor.
Yes.
And this spider armor to this day is one of my favorite suits ever. But this Spider-Man, we're in his reality. Sorry, we're in
Ben Reilly's.
Ben Reilly's, but we have to go later to their reality, right?
Yes.
To his reality. So we're in Ben Reilly's, and they talk about his whole Spider Carnage is the villain. And the Carnage symbiote comes through the portal to latch on to the Peter in his universe that thought he was a clone.
Right.
And that grew hatred for realizing that he's not the real one. The cool factor of the Iron Spider in this show, because they're all the same Peter, but this Peter is a billionaire. He has his own, science center. He doesn't know the meaning of loss because he never lost Uncle Ben. Everything has come to him so easily.
Yep.
It goes into their whole battle. It's like, oh, I never lose. It's like, I don't have any of this consequence. And he just does things without thinking.
Yeah, he jumped through that like grate because he's just like, I'm just not gonna lose this fight.
Yeah, he's like, I never lose.
Yeah.
And the dynamic of all the Spider-Man is great together.
It is. Now, this brings me to a question that I have about the ideas put about in Across the Spider-Verse. If the Iron Spiders didn't lose Uncle Ben, that's still a consistency here. It's not inconsistent that he's Spider-Man. It's just that he's not a true Spider-Man. You know what I mean? Like,
I do, yeah.
It's not that. It's like he
doesn't know the great responsibility.
Yeah.
Right? He just knows that he has. He's basically a cocky, arrogant villain almost
Right.
in his own mind, because he doesn't know the meaning of consequence, loss, responsibility, the weight of having these powers and losing people you love, because his life is perfect.
Right, right. And I think it was a good addition to the team, the Spider-Man team, because even though it doesn't make sense in like a tactical way, like he's like the loose cannon. It's like we don't need that on the team. Like that's just gonna impede our job. But he's there to show Peter, like our Peter, no, I am meant to lead this team because I've had those sacrifices to make. I've had those losses. I've had that doubt in myself, and I'm still here.
Throughout the battle, when each one of them kind of get knocked out, the Beyonder teleports them back to Madame Web's area.
Yes.
But Spider-Armor eventually gets knocked out because he's being overconfident and he goes in overzealous with the goblins. So the final three are Scarlet, our Spider-Man, and the Six-Armed Spider-Man.
Yes.
But at this point, the mutation in the Six-Armed Spider-Man activates and he turns into the Man Spider.
Yes.
And so the Beyonder only has so much power left because he's not in his home dimension. So he uses the last of his power to teleport the Man Spider away and bring in the powerless Spider-Man to kind of shut down this atom bomb that's about to explode with this dimensional portal. But then they figure out that Spider Carnage traveled to the Spider-Armor's dimension.
Yep.
And so Peter has to go follow him. But the Spider-Armor's like, oh no, what are you doing? This is my dimension. I have to go back. And Madame Web's like, no, you're not going back. You're useless right now.
Right.
It's
you failed.
I'm sending the leader. You failed.
Yeah.
And so Peter goes there, and this is when they bring in, I think it's nice because we've had Felicia and Mary Jane, but we get a little hint of Gwen Stacy.
Yes.
And Gwen Stacy is Spider-Armor's Peter Parker's girlfriend in this universe. Everybody knows he's Spider-Man. He doesn't have to wear a mask. And he's like, they're like, oh, you're wearing the classic tonight. Like,
yes.
He's always wearing the Spider-Armor. But then he sees Mary Jane again, and he's like losing it. Because it's like, oh my God, I love you. And Mary Jane's like, what are you talking about? Like, this whole thing. But we get to the point where he has to go face to face with Spider Carnage.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think is more than just battling himself, like with the symbiote, he's seeing what he could have become if he stayed with the symbiote, right?
Right.
But he knows that inside of that symbiote, he's just like, this Peter is just like himself. So he goes, what does he do? He does the only thing he can and brings the Uncle Ben that's still alive in this universe to confront Spider Carnage.
Exactly.
And I think it's such a great way for Peter, full circle moment. Like he realizes what he has to do. He's not going to fight him. He's going to attack his heart because that's what's most important and how he can reach him. Because the symbiote only goes off of fear and anger. And so Uncle Ben talks him out and he can't rid the Carnage symbiote. So he has to disappear and uses the portal to disappear.
Yep.
But then we get a nice little moment between Uncle Ben and Peter Parker. Our Peter,
yeah.
And he tells him that he's proud of him.
Yeah.
It's a nice little send-off to Peter with all the loss that he's gone through, seeing his Uncle Ben one last time.
Exactly.
Before he goes into see Madame Web and everybody else, and they go take the powerless one back because they want Peter Parker to meet, they want Spider-Man to meet Stan Lee.
Oh, I was like, because when I first watched it, I was like, oh, I wonder who like the powerless one is.
And he's just the comic book of fiction, right? He's the guy they just put on a show for.
Yeah, he's
our universe. Right?
Exactly.
He's our universe.
Exactly. And and Peter talks with Stan and swings around with him. That's a really good way to cap off the show.
Yeah,
right.
He also talks to him about like all the stuff he's gone through, and then Stan's like, "Wow, you're definitely not the guy I've been writing about all these years. Like, there's more depth to the character than what you thought about." And seeing Spider-Man as a hero, and obviously that would change how Stan writes future stories, right?
Exactly.
And then Madame Web comes back, and then she takes Peter into the portal, and then he's like, "Where to now?" And he's like, "I think you're entitled to some happiness, so we're gonna go find the real Mary Jane."
Well, Madame Web, where to now?
Face front, true believer. We are going to find the real Mary Jane Watson.
What?
It has been a long, hard journey, and I think you are finally entitled to some happiness.
Amen to that, dear lady. Amen to that.
And it ends on a cliffhanger.
Oh.
And you're like,
But the thing is, it's like I was satisfied with that ending.
Yeah.
If we got more, I don't know how strong it would be.
Because you don't want to we saw them reunite.
Exactly.
And they got married. It's like, that's what's going to happen again.
Exactly.
You just hope he doesn't lose her again, right?
Right.
So that what a show.
Like we said at the very beginning, it's definitely a product of its time, but it still has that like appeal of what superhero stories intend to tell us.
Right.
The main characters' sacrifices, their hardships, their losses, learning to become comfortable with who they are.
Because even though the animation, was 2D, but they were also trying to get into the 3D stuff with the environments,
the buildings,
buildings, which it was really cool for its time, and like reusing. Obviously, they had to reuse some animations if you noticed throughout the show.
They did,
because
yes.
animation costs money. Everybody, it's expensive.
Oh yeah.
Aside from all of that and like the 90s writing, it's like it's simple stories.
It is.
And Spider-Man as a whole, this is definitely the reason why people love the character.
Yes.
And you can't take away how the stories were told from obviously the product of
right
how it was made.
You can't watch this in 2023 and be like, that's the best show ever made. It's like, no. But
it's a great Spider-Man show.
It is.
But it's also you can't look at it like you can't knock it for the animation.
No.
With the mixing of medias, because that looked incredible in the 90s. Like you can only look at it like a storytelling perspective.
Exactly.
You can't look at something made 30 years ago and be like, oh yeah,
right.
It still holds up today. The 2D stuff holds up. Some of the animation parts of the show hold up, but like the stories is what makes it a good show. I'm sure you'll be like me, where there's obviously you're not going to rewatch it all again.
No.
But there'll be definitely certain episodes you'll go back to every once in a while, just because you want to feel like I felt back in the day as a 6-year-old wearing my pajamas, watching this show and being captivated by my favorite hero of all time.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. Some rainy Sunday morning in the very near future, I'll probably put on a couple episodes.
Yeah.
To pass
the
the time.
Symbiote Saga. Turning Point will never not be dated. Like it stands the test of time. The animation, they stepped up, the storytelling.
Yep.
Everything, but it's also more than just one episode. It's taking everything the first 3 seasons have done till then. And then you have Secret Wars, which is really cool. Seeing all the characters and everything you've witnessed in these 5 seasons come to light.
Exactly.
And then the Spider-Verse saga, all the partnerships. It's so cool.
Yep. We don't normally
we don't
do
have
this.
to rate it.
I was just going to say, do you want to rate it? No, I think
there's some bad episodes. There's some meh episodes, but there's overall great episodes. I can't say it's like a 3.5 out of 5 from today, but like back in the day was my life.
It was like
so I can't really
7
rate
out
it.
of 5.
yeah. You can't rate it. Like look at you got this, you got the back. Like it's the whole reason why I like love telling stories and
exactly
reading comics and buying toys when I was a kid. It's like this is the show that got me where I am. Right?
Exactly. No, and I really appreciate the impact that it has had on our popular culture and our views and interpretations of Spider-Man now. Coming into it now, looking back at the last 30 years of material, it's like, oh, this stuff wouldn't have happened
without this show.
You're right.
This show reinvented Spider-Man and set off the future of Spider-Man.
Right.
And even musically, right? The score in this, I don't think, obviously this is new for you, but I don't hear Spider-Man music without this score.
Understandably.
Like the, dun, 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 dun. Like the intro alone, electric guitar, the ending, and
yes.
like the villain soundtracks and like the tense moments, the quiet moments. Because not a lot of cartoons now have music playing the whole time to really help get you invested in the moment. Because whenever Spider-Man's in danger, there's music playing. But whenever there's a heroic moment for him, they play that dun, dun, dun.
Yes.
Like it's the whole thing. Like that music carries to even the themes of today's Spider-Man stuff.
That's the thing. It's just like, especially for television, you don't have to make a grand score for every single episode. It doesn't have to be different. But if you keep those same themes for those specific moments, you associate it better with what you're trying to convey. If you have visuals and story and music all coming together, there's a perfect combination. The viewer will interpret it exactly as you want when you do that. Watching it now, as dated as some of the things are, it's a really fun experience. It kind of gives you a good idea of what we were feeling as kids. Like everything was heroic and kind of epic in its own way. Everything was there to like pump kids up. essentially. That's how I feel that show is. It's there to pump you up, to get you excited, and
Make you buy toys.
I mean, hey, yeah, if I watched it, there would not be a full shelf at Toys R Us.
Yeah.
Like they set out to sell toys, and I'm sure they did, because those costumes were iconic. They still are. And if you watch this show, you'll be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It'll definitely hold a fond place in my heart. I think. I enjoyed it.
Well, I'm glad.
Yeah, yeah. It was a cool time. It was great. I enjoyed it.
Well, you all know how I feel, because this is my entire life
Yep.
wrapped up into 2.5 hours. So I want to thank you all for listening. I want to thank you, Nick, for actually sitting through all the episodes and jumping on this with me, this ride.
Absolutely, it was my pleasure. Definitely a lot of fun.
And this has been 2 Hours on a Sunday. I'm Brian,
I'm Nick.
and we'll catch you guys later.